What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me is my great co-host, Ralph Hanna. And guys, here we are, another episode, and unfortunately, we do have to talk about some of the negative stuff first, from what we saw last weekend in the Superclasico. But before we get to that, I guess I'll go to you, Ralph, since it's just us today, no Fede, but we obviously send his love to him, but we have to send some love to someone else as well, actually. Let's go on a high note, actually. Let's start with a high note, actually, and talk about some things that's been going on, not necessarily in our world, but certainly someone that has always been a good friend of the show, and yeah, hopefully that she kills it in the next couple games.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, Roberto. Everybody watching, listening. Fede is, as we speak, commentating on third division Paraguayan football, so unfortunately can't be here. But yeah, shout out to friend of the show, Florencia Cáceres, who, if you remember, she was on about a year ago, I think, talking about U16s, U17s Paraguay. Well, she was captaining the under 18s of Paraguay in Turkey last week, and as we were recording, they were beating Norway, the vice champions of Europe. They were beating Norway 1-0 to win the UEFA Friendship Tournament. So big congrats to her and all the team. They went one better than last time. So they played a similar tournament in Turkey a year ago, and they lost on penalties to the US in the final. So this was one better. The goal was from Alison Barreiro, who's played alongside Claudia Martinez for a long time when those two were playing up front. So a lot of exciting times, and they actually kick off. So it's non-stop because they kick off another Sudamericano tonight against Argentina in Paraguay because Paraguay is hosting that tournament. So good luck there.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, it's going to serve as qualification for the tournament in Morocco that's going to happen later this year, actually. So hopefully that they continue to uh, make us proud and obviously qualify. A big year for Paraguay at World Cups. Obviously, we got the men's one coming up in about 48 days. Certainly, but it continues on that. It continues on from all levels of football, whatever gender it is. So obviously sending our love to Flora and yeah, best of luck to her as always, and obviously to her family. Right. So we're gonna start off with something that, obviously, we go into a lot of these matches and, we usually talk about what we saw on the pitch, but unfortunately we have to talk about what's been going on off the pitch because I'm sure everyone that obviously is tuned into this show and obviously has an eye on Paraguayan football definitely saw the unfortunate circumstances that happened in the Paraguayan Superclasico that ended in basically chaos and violence and had to be suspended due to fans clashing in the stands, with supporters and policemen injured. So just a little bit of what we saw. Obviously, we can't talk about the game because obviously it wasn't enough to be of a sample size. But basically, what happened was the referee Juan Gabriel need to stop the game between Olimpia and Cerro, and it was a big game for both of these two teams. Obviously, like we talked about in the preview, the game was going to basically determine if either Olimpia was going to be basically crowned champion at this point, or Cerro Porteño still have a chance, with a couple games left in the season. Unfortunately, we will probably not know the results, and we'll talk about, I guess the circumstances and the punishment after this. But basically, what happened? The game was stopped in around the 29th minute when there was clashes in one stand in Norte of the Defensores del Chaco, and you saw basically hundreds of fans rushing onto the pitch where you had fans fighting the police and police firing rubber bullets and tear gas. And then again, this isn't something that is rare because we obviously see this in Super Classicos mainly off the pitch. We see violence happens, and of course after the games too between the Barras of Olimpia and Cerro Porteño. But unfortunately, we did see it go into the stands, and it took a while. And then we actually saw fans go into the actual pitch of the Defensores del Chaco, and that was when it was like, okay, this is for real. This is a serious thing. And Ralph, you and I have been to Super Classicos, and obviously we know how heated they can be, but we would have never thought that something like this would occur, where basically you have fans on the pitch, and so many getting injured as well and clashes with the police, and of all this sort of hullabaloo of what is supposed to be a demonstration of the best that Paraguay can offer to not just to the country but to the world, basically, because I think that's what always South America has always been known for, is for the passion that the fans provide in these type of big games. And unfortunately we saw an ugly side on Sunday night at the Defensores.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually the first time since 1998 that a Superclasico has been suspended for violence. So it's not something that you're accustomed to seeing, even though, as you kind of explained very well, Paraguayan football and I think South American football in general does live on the edge, right? I mean, it actively supports the ultras. That's very clear. Not the violence, but the ultras that are the organized fans that can end up making some of that atmosphere. But yeah, you're living on the edge, I suppose, by not having as much control maybe as you wanted. In this case, it spilled over. But to that point, okay, 1998, the Superclásico hasn't been suspended for violence, but unfortunately, we've seen, especially with Cerro, more recently, there's been a lot of issues between two fan groups within Cerro. That doesn't seem to have been the issue this time. But as recently as it would have been 18 months ago against Dos de Mayo, they had the game suspended. And so it's not something that's new. It's particularly to Cerro. Olimpia have problems as well, but in this case, we're talking definitely about everything points towards the Cerro fans basically rushed the police on entrance. So the problems actually started outside before the game, outside the stadium. They rushed the police so they could get in. That meant they could smuggle things in. Those things that were smuggled in is eventually what's being used against the police inside the stadium. And I mean, there's, of course, after this happens, there's a big blame game about, was it the policing? Was it the fans? Is it both? I think Blas Reguera, the president of Cerro, did one of those very like double-sided statements where he's like, solidarizing, we're worried about the families and the injured, and then he's kind of said something like, but the people that had to pacify the situation did the opposite. And he was talking about the police pointed, guns. They shot people with rubber bullets, but they also pointed guns at fans um, very early on in what might not have been the best way to contain the situation. But then, of course, ultimately, I think a lot of this falls down on Cerro and on Reguera, who's the new president of Cerro. So, being the new president, he will have this kind of, part of his mandate would have to be to keep the Barra under control and organized. There's never really been a big push to kind of eradicate it. I don't know. That's never comes up. It's more like keep things under control so we don't have any problems. And that's, as a president and as the directors, that's your job. And that's basically been the way Paraguayan football manages itself. And clearly that hasn't happened here. So I mean, it was really sad to see because like I say, we haven't seen this in such a big game for such a long time. And then it just happens that it's coming in a game that was important. There's been Super Clásicos in recent years where the result hasn't mattered for the league because it's a big game in itself, but maybe one team's running away with the league or one of the Cerro Olimpia aren't really in the fight. But this one really was. So we wanted to see the result. We needed the result on the pitch. And we're in the one season where the time is against us because of the World Cup. So because of FIFA, because of the World Cup, everything has to finish at the end of May. There is not 22 weeks in the year for Paraguay to do this apertura in a normal, 22 week because it's 22 games. So they're cramming it all in. And now they have this huge game that could possibly be reprogrammed. I think it's unlikely. I guess we can talk about that more. But there's just really little time for that. So whatever happens now, you feel like the league title maybe was missing such a key ingredient, which was this full game in 90 minutes. So ultimately a real shame for Paraguayan football that this game wasn't able to be completed because of the Cerro fans and the violence in the stands.
Yeah, now, of course, now the big thing is what happens because obviously, there's still chat about what should occur. We obviously saw a statement from the APF. Obviously a team has to forfeit, a match, if the supporters force the game to be suspended. Obviously we saw the Olimpia president, Rodrigo Nogues, say that he wants his team to get the 3 points. And then, like you said, it's really this blame game that everyone's playing for. But it's an unfortunate situation, like you said, that this has to happen. in such a crucial game, not only because of the stature of the Superclasico, but also just of this point of how close this was in the season, like you said, Ralph. And who's to say what's going to happen? Obviously we're talking about what's going to happen in this season, but what could happen in future seasons? Like, do we come to a point where Super Classicos are not going to be played, with fans or without away fans at least? There are we're still waiting for those big punishments that could indeed happen to both these teams.
Yeah, that's right. So the APF, the Paraguayan FA, have come out with what they've called like a temporary provision, I suppose, or provisional statement, but they've suspended Cerro fans for 2 games. So there'll be at least 2 games behind closed doors. But they really did say this is kind of a provisional thing. This is not going to be the final resolution on what happens to the game itself. Just this is just an early ban. But there's a couple of things you read into that statement. I mean, one is they talked about because of the problems in the immediate area and in the stands. So they are pointing to, okay, outside the stadium, and it was the getting inside the stadium where some of the problem was. That kind of puts a bit of responsibility again on Olimpia, which is this strange thing. We've seen it with CONMEBOL as well, where the home team basically has a responsibility for security. But as we saw in CONMEBOL, it becomes a bit ridiculous where an away group of fans are almost deliberately trying to get a game suspended. I think it was the in with the Chilean fans in Argentina. I mean, it, I don't know. That's a bit strange, but technically, and you could point to that. And what Cerro is saying is, well, we organized the Superclásico. We didn't have any problems in our stadium. Olympia, you're doing it in the national stadium. You've had problems. So there's like almost that blame game there starting. And then of course you have the police themselves, right? They always do a security plan ahead of the game, and so those security plans are signed off by the police and by the 2 teams, right? And probably by, I would assume, by the Paraguayan FA. I mean, these things are always difficult. There's no other game on that day in Paraguay because all the police are needed. There's not really, you don't usually see big events in Asuncion the same day as a Clásico because, again, you need so much security, so much police. But it's overtime. It's a Sunday. How do you get as many? I mean, you saw in the stand, the police were just badly outnumbered, right? We were talking at the very beginning. It was like 11 to 12 very young policemen. Most of the injured are in their early 20s against, what, thousands of people. I mean, that it wasn't a great situation that, then reinforcements came in and that kind of thing. But you do wonder, like, was the plan really as good as it should be, or was it done on bare bones because of budgets, which I guess we maybe never know at that point. But anyway, you can see how all this blame is going around. One thing Coto Nogues did say, the Olympia president, is he doesn't like the idea of banning away fans, which has been let's call it the Argentinian solution. So in Argentina, for a long time, away fans were banned, and that was their way of trying to solve some of their hooligan problem. I think, yeah, there's people have enjoyed recently that Olympia fans have been able to go to the new La Nueva Olla, and that Cerro fans get some tickets for the Defensores del Chaco. So people maybe don't want to go down that route, but that's a possible thing for the future. But yeah, at the moment we're waiting. I mean, it's for me, it seems really unlikely they can replay the game just because there's no more time. They're running out of time. We're about to talk about Libertadores Sudamericana, so it's not like midweek they can put a game in because both Olimpia and Cerro are in those competitions. And so it's just, when do you find the time to put such a high profile game? Again, they've done it before, but it's very rare you play a Super Classico in an evening. So midweek is usually out of the question again because it's just too hard to make that secure. And we're talking about a security thing. If they play it behind closed doors, I don't know if Olympia would go for that because they'd lose so much. I don't know what they're going to do with these fans if they're refunding them, but they potentially lose so many earnings, and a closed doors game would actually, when you're meant to be the home team, would obviously give Cerro a huge sporting advantage. So let's see where it goes. But I find it very difficult to see how this game gets played before the end of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I genuinely think that, and, again, I think the season's already done. I think Olimpia are going to do enough to win this title anyway, so it almost feels like a formality at this point. But yeah, I think just because, like you said, the scheduling and also just the circumstances make it very difficult for it to replay it. So, again, I don't want to be speculating anything at all, but I genuinely think that this is just going to be in favor of Olimpia, obviously because of everything that goes against Cedro's way. So we'll have to wait and see. But obviously, yeah, hopefully that there are lessons to be learned. And unfortunately, that it has to be caused because of Sorry, it has to be because of what had occurred on the weekend. That circumstances have to be made, but hopefully that again things can be changed for the better because no one wants to go to a football match and especially a Superclasico and feel as if though their life is at risk. So let's change gears of what we have coming up this midweek because obviously, like you had mentioned, yes, we have Copa Libertadores and Sudamericana starting in crucial points for all five teams. Sorry, all four teams participating in this tournament. Let's start off obviously with Cerro Porteño. We'll start off. They actually are going to be hosting Palmeiras. Obviously a match that everyone always feels as if though this is like the big test to see how good they are on all fronts. Obviously, Cedar coming off their 1-0 win against Junior, certainly that gives them the momentum to head into this game. But, like we said, these are always the matches against the Brazilian teams, and especially against a team like Palmeiras. It's always going to be difficult. It's always going to be difficult to try to get something in this match, but there is always the hope that, you know, maybe they could snatch something there and feel as if though it would be a big statement for them in this entire group if they were able to get a win there.
Yeah, this is feeling well, I think it feels like this game always happens, but I think actually this is now the non-Paraguayan team that Cerro have played most in the Libertadores, just because just looking back, I mean, so they played 2022, 23, and 25, so and now 2026. So they just keep playing. Bad news for Cerro is that Palmeiras have won all those games. So in recent times, you have to go back to 2018 when Cerro did win a game against Palmeiras in Libertadores. So I mean, yeah, they look so strong. I mean, they Ramon Sosa scored two penalties last night as they got through in the cup, and as Ramon Sosa has been playing quite well actually as one of another player who's come through and Palmeiras just have so much talent all around. So for Cerro, it's going to be what can we do? Can we somehow take a point? And this is maybe the most interesting game now to see what Holland does because we've had coaches in these recent Cerro games. I think Chiqui Arce was the coach one time, and we know he's always been a bit difficult in trying to play his style, whatever. And so in Libertadores, that cannot work. I think last year was Baba already in there. I think so when they played.
Yep.
But again, not a coach with that much experience. And so now you've got someone like Holland who has so much experience in the competition and I'm really interested to see if he sets this up very differently. One thing he's been doing with Cerro, and even for the Clásico, he did this with the starting lineup, is he keeps switching around his central defenders. I mean, he's hardly played the same two central defenders all season, which or in any of his games since he took over, which for me is really strange. That's usually you try and settle that down quite quickly, right? Maybe your attacking players you might move around. So I'm really interested to see how he sets this up. We saw in the last game against Junior, they played what's kind of like the illegal team because they can't play in the local league with six foreigners. I'm guessing he'll be doing that again. I don't think he needs to worry about, can I keep this team in the league as well? So I think we'll see probably assuming they're all fit, like Matias Perez and Vegetti and um Fabricio Dominguez, and so all of these foreign players that they don't always all play together in the league, but I think he'll try and fit them all in. But yeah, really, really interested to see how Cerro set up because I think even though they're at home, he might try and set them up just to get a point because that would be a huge bonus for them, that extra point, having lost the game away against Cristal.
Yeah, I'm about to say it feels as if though a point is more much. feasible than an actual 3 points. But eventually records have to be broken, don't they, Ralph?
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible.
Mhm.
Palmeiras did draw, right? So
They did.
it's not like, they're unbeatable kind of thing.
Yeah.
But just those recent games, I'm thinking of those 6 games because they played each other twice in those games we're saying since 2022. I don't even remember Cerro like scoring. They've been like
No,
1
they
nil,
probably
2 nil.
probably was a consolation, but yeah, I don't remember it either.
Yeah, and the last year was very much like Palmeiras came and maybe they only won 1 nil or 2 nil, but they were in control of the game the whole time in terms of possession and when they allowed Cerro to attack, it was like we'll let you shoot from outside the box, but
Hmm.
that's as much as we'll do. So I don't know, the difference in quality was so big last year. I'm 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 not expecting much, especially from this Cerro team that is, like we're saying, it's been changed around so much. So it's hard to see, they even the players don't even know what the starting lineup is at the moment. So it's going to be very, very difficult. But maybe it's much easier to play defensively when you're like that and when you're not all playing together than be a good attacking team. So maybe they do something to frustrate Palmeiras and get away with a draw. Get away with a draw in their home game.
It'll be fun to watch. It'll be really fun to watch. Obviously, we have the other team in the Libertadores participating in Libertad. They host Independiente del Valle. Again, they have looked really poor so far in this Copa Libertadores. Independiente del Valle, of course, have been so well. They're top of the table at this moment. Sorry, top of their group. So they need to get a win here. They need to send a statement. And obviously this is coming off of the sacking of Francisco Chiquiarce on the weekend. So yeah, like a couple of days ago. So maybe this new managerial bounce happens to them, Ralph. Who knows? But it looks very tough, especially the way that they've been playing, and obviously how this group has been shaping up.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, the Chiquiase resignation. So he resigned in the dressing room at halftime because he was 3-0 down to Rubio New. I mean, he told his players at halftime. Obviously, he told the press after the game at the post-game press conference. But I mean, the losing 3-0 to Rubio New was really surprising to me. And we just saw Chiquiase doing this, which we talked about before, playing these really young players and trying to get them to perform and they're just kind of they're not quite there yet. I think for me, it's very hard if you have your right back 17 and your centre back is 18. I mean, maybe one of them throw in with a more experienced line, but to have like half of your defensive line teenagers is it's just really tough. I think that's not to say they're bad players. It's just saying how are they going to be able to like grind out results at this point. So Libertad, they play Olimpia, of course, this weekend, so it doesn't get any easier before they play Independiente del Valle. And they're in a very strange situation that Sergio Aquino, who was the coach last year, the head coach, has now come in as assistant coach to Juan Samudio, who is a Libertad legend. He was their top scorer until recently, until people like Tacuara came back and scored more goals than him. But I mean, he's not. He's been a coach at youth level for a long time, but again, not a head coach with experience in Libertadores. And Sergio Aquino got his first head coaching experience with Libertad last year. So I mean, I don't know how much will have changed between Rubio New and the Rubio New game and then this game when Independiente del Valle come turn up and they've got Olimpia at the weekend where they could lose too. So I mean, yeah, really hard to see what happens, but also I'm really unsure what to expect because there could be the idea that they're bringing in a youth coach to replace Chikiase, who was playing youth players, and they're just saying, we're all in now. All we're going to do is try and promote players for the rest of the year, or maybe for the rest of this season at least. And, forget too much about results. And it's all about trying to give players experience. So we might just see a similar side. Or somebody might just say, hey, I need, sorry, Thiago Fernandez, sorry, Esteban Villalba, you guys go back or take a breather. Let me get some more experienced people in. And even though they might not be at the same potential quality, and let me just try and steady the ship. So I guess we'll find out against Olimpia what kind of team he puts out. But even that won't be a true indication because he's probably thinking ahead to the Independiente del Valle game. So yeah, really, really hard to figure out what Libertad are going to do. But this is definitely not. This is one of the weakest Libertad sides I think I can remember in the last 10 years in terms of it's just not clicking for them. Nothing seems to be working.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough to see how they can really go into this one. Obviously, the other games that are happening in the Sudamericana, obviously, let's talk about Olimpia in this one because obviously Olimpia are coming off their draw against Barraca Central. Now they head off to the Estadio Centenario in Rio de Janeiro to take on Vasco da Gama. And, maybe, obviously we'll see on the weekend and everything that happened in the Superclasico. Maybe it motivates the squad a bit better and hopefully that they can turn a page and be able to focus on the main objective and is to try to finish off that group in a good not finish off but continue to gain momentum in that group in a better way.
Yeah, I think the fact they're playing a Libertad, well, maybe they would have preferred to play Libertad under Chiquiasi because they would have known more what to expect. But I think the fact they're playing such a such a poor Libertad at the moment is they won't be too concerned then having to play or travel to Brazil after. And on paper at the beginning of the season, this would have looked very difficult. I think it looks much more feasible because of what we just mentioned about Libertad, but also Vasco. Vasco is not Palmeiras. It's not every Brazilian team is at that same level. And I think I don't know Vasco are a lower mid-table at the moment. They seem to have drawn a lot of games and not been able to win a lot of games. They're missing a player that scored lots of goals for them because of course Vegeti's now at Cerro. So I think yeah they'll go quietly confident Olimpia again to get a point. I don't think they need for an away game in Brazil, you don't need to win. I think although they also have an away game in Argentina, it's going to be Barracas. It comes up after the Vasco game. So I think if they take a point here and then they'll probably feel they can beat Barracas. They should have beaten them. We talked about that in the home game. Then they'll be doing pretty well in this group. So um and we've also seen I think Olympia have been defensively just the best side in the league in Paraguay when they have Gaston Olveira there and he's playing very well, of course. He's thinking about the World Cup. They've they've usually been able to keep teams out. I think they'd be quietly confident. I wouldn't assume they go out for a win in against Vasco, but I think they'll come back with something, and they're very much hopes alive in the Sudamericana.
And one team that also has their hopes alive is obviously Recoleta. They've been kind of a story for so many people so far within the last year, for good and for bad. But now they take on Deportivo Cuenca over there at the Defensores. Obviously, will not be the big party house that we've seen in the past with Superclásicos, for example. But hey, look, I mean, look, they could gain momentum if they can get a first win here. I mean, depending on what happens in the San Lorenzo Santos game. Recoleta could be in a good spot, heading into now the big game against Santos, the other big game that they have to host at home the following weekend, which actually will be played. This was officially announced at the Rio Parapati in Pedro Juan Caballero. So Recoleta to be playing two home games in two different locations, Ralph.
Yeah, it's interesting for Recoleta because they got the draws against the two stronger teams, and so now suddenly against Cuenca, the home game against Cuenca when the draw came out would have been the most winnable game in theory because obviously away at Cuenca's there's slight altitude, it's not huge altitude. But so suddenly it's like, wow, if you win this game and let's say Santos and San Lorenzo draw, which isn't out of the question, they could actually be top of the group. So it's a position I don't think they expected to be in. Alan Wilk has just come back or has come back fairly recently from injury. He's scoring goals. They look very good when they play on their so they have the Recoleta pitch, which they don't use, but that's what they train on, is synthetic. And so they try and play on the synthetic pitches when they can, and they won 5-0 against Dos de Mayo in the last game because they're playing at Independiente's ground, Independiente in Paraguay. which is synthetic pitch. So they always look very good. It's interesting. Obviously, they can't get those games for CONMEBOL because they're not the stadiums. It's not because of the pitch, but the stadiums aren't big enough. But it's really interesting that they're going to take the Santos game up um, to Dos de Mayo. I think the reason they're doing that is to try and get more Brazilians. It's right on the border of Brazil, so they're trying to get Brazilian fans in Brazil to come over the border and maybe make some extra money there. But going back to this game against Cuenca, the money's on the table if they win that game because the bonuses to win games is huge. They've been very close, but they haven't managed it yet. So I mean, before this whole tournament started, I did not see Recoleta being able to do this, but I really think they could get a win against Cuenca and then all of a sudden there's the whole group kind of opens up. The group's very open anyway because of the fact they've been drawing and Santos lost to their Santos have lost. They haven't won a game yet. So I mean, yeah, it's exciting. I think Recoleta could do something and maybe both teams to score, but I think they might get 2 goals and might be able to win.
That'd be good. That'd be good for them to do and get something
Huge.
from there, honestly. And yeah, hey, maybe eventually we see Luis Vidal play some game. Not maybe not this one, but eventually does he play a game? I guess I'll run that prediction on you, Ralph. Do you see Luis Vidal playing any game that's already gone up?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think he will, but I think he'll come on in the final game. I mean, maybe he does the Santos game actually, with it being in Dos de Mayo Stadium. Maybe he gets the last few minutes, but I think he's singled out or in my mind, he must have singled out the San Lorenzo game, so the last home game, and trying to do something there. Oh no, that's the away game. Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it'll have to be Santos. Yeah, I think he might do the Santos one because I think he'll do it at home. I don't think he'd do it in an away game. He'd want to do it in Paraguay. So yeah, that's going to be very interesting, right? There's seeing Neymar in Dos de Mayo Stadium and possibly Luis Vidal coming on to play against him, try and get his shirt at the end of the game. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun to see, that's for sure. What hasn't been fun, of course, and we'll close this with the obviously, unfortunately, we didn't see Julian Ciso qualify for the Copa de France final. They actually lost on the against Lens on the weekend. Sorry, on the week midweek. And so I think obviously, that's one title gone for Julio. Obviously, they still have to play the what's it called, the Conference League, and so obviously there is a chance for them to gain some sort of trophies. And obviously there is also yeah. So I think obviously it goes into what we had to talk about in the national team because obviously what we also saw on the weekend was a lot of injuries. Actually, we obviously saw Almiron get injured for Atlanta United. I think he left at. I think he got subbed in and then he got subbed out immediately after. So apparently that's fine. Omar Lerete as well. Apparently he's fine. But the one that was the big talking point, Ralph, was of course with Diego Gomez. Diego Gomez obviously got a knee injury after he landed very heavily when he went for a challenge when trying to win a header in the 2-2 draw against Tottenham. Many people assumed the worst. You didn't actually, which I'm actually happy that you didn't. I also admittedly did not because I don't know. I just had this feeling that, he was walking on his own afterwards after he fell. Yes, he was very emotional. He was crying. He was definitely not in the best way, but thankfully, the news that we got on Monday and in other days is that, obviously his manager, Hurt Seller, said that it was positive news. It's not as bad as we expected, that it's basically going to be week to week, but it's not going to be a huge injury that's going to rule him out for months, which is obviously a big thing heading into the World Cup. So, certainly it scared a lot of people. They assumed the worst on the weekend when we saw him leave the pitch early on, but from what we've been seeing and from reports is that he looks like he'll be ready for the World Cup, but his season is, of course, over for Brighton.
Yeah, I mean, we're at that stage of the season where these kind of injuries can really like rule you out of the World Cup at this point. So you mentioned those players, but also Gustavo Caballero at Portsmouth has been struggling a bit. He hasn't played the last 2 games, I think, because of injury. So I mean, it's starting to rack up and with the Diego Gomez situation, yeah, I was less worried because he walked off, and also because he did his cruciate when he was very young, so he's had a very big injury. He knows I mean, he would have known if it was something like that. And when you walk off, usually it's probably not something like ligament damage like that. So I was hopeful hopeful that it was what it's ended up to be, which is more of a week to week injury than the months. Of course, the big issue, I suppose, now for Gustavo Alfaro is going to be that he won't be fully fit. There's no way, right, for game one, or he's not going to be like match sharp because he won't have played what's now, yeah. So it's like over a month. So for Alfaro, it might be a case of, hey, for the US game, do I like bring him on as sub and get him some minutes and then use him for the other games? Or, there's all this kind of thing that maybe he wasn't or hoping he didn't have to consider originally. But this is going to be the reality now. We're coming off these really long European seasons. Brazil is crazy, the amount of games somebody like Junior Alonso or Gustavo Gomez have played. So they're playing so much football, and we're right at the kind of the cusp of it, and it really doesn't stop, right? Because the Paraguayan season at least ends, I think it's scheduled 23rd of May, and then Champions League finals 31st of May, and I guess the other European finals are kind of around their final
Yep.
game of May,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then
It'll be the
Paraguay.
last one. It'll be the last one.
Yeah, I'll be the last one, the 31st. But then Paraguay are playing, I guess, 6th of June, they've now saying. I don't know if that's official, but they're saying they're going to try and play a friendly in Asunción to see the team off. So I mean, it's just non-stop, right? It's not like you even get a rest at the end of the season. And so, yeah, now the big focus is on the injuries and hoping that players can stay fit in this period where they're all trying to do things for their club. I mean, of course, Diego Gomez, their Brighton is still kind of pushing around for a European place. So I mean, it's not like they can take the time off, and the clubs aren't going to give them the time off. They're important players. So it's just going to be the reality. But thankful he's obviously in. He'll be able to play. Just now it's a case of managing that, how you do that with someone that's not going to be match sharp, and how you kind of put them in. Or maybe Alfaro just says, hey, just go, you're Diego Gomez, you've done it before, and leaves him to it.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think obviously the fact that he's still in consideration for the World Cup is obviously a big thing. It's not like, oh, he's out and we're talking about basically replacements. Like, no, he's still in there. Like you said, worst case scenario, he doesn't play the opening game against the US and he, gets better for the game against Turkey and then Australia. He, becomes a starter in that Paraguay are in a good spot to qualify. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But nevertheless, yeah, it's at least positive news to end basically on what it felt like negative at the beginning with the Superclasico violence. At least we could end on a positive note as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision. For myself, Roberto Rojas, and Ralph Hanna, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.